In 1943, renowned psychic Edgar Cayce delivered one of his most profound readings to a grieving mother in Norfolk, revealing that her recently deceased husband hadn't simply vanished into some ethereal void. Instead, he was actively engaged in the most crucial spiritual transition of his entire existence, undergoing a systematic 3-month process that would determine his soul's trajectory for potentially thousands of years. The woman, Margaret Whitmore, had lost her spouse just 6 weeks earlier in a naval accident, and what Cayce revealed about those initial months after death would fundamentally transform how humanity understands the continuation of consciousness beyond physical existence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, we've saved something extra special for you. This wasn't mere consolation for the bereaved. Cayce accessed information from the cosmic consciousness itself, documenting a detailed map of the soul's journey through what he termed the adjustment planes, revealing activities so specific and purposeful that they challenged every assumption about death being an end rather than a profound beginning. What Margaret learned that day in Norfolk would later become one of the most significant spiritual revelations of the 20th century, preserved in archives that most people have never encountered, yet containing truths that could revolutionize how the living relate to those who have crossed over. The revelation began when Margaret described experiencing vivid dreams where her husband appeared more vibrant and purposeful than he had been during his final years of life. Rather than dismissing these as grief-induced fantasies, Cayce's reading confirmed that she was actually witnessing her husband's genuine activities during what he called the orientation phase of afterlife existence. According to the documented session, souls don't simply float in peaceful bliss after death. They engage in intensive spiritual work that makes their earthly careers seem insignificant by comparison. Edgar Cayce's extraordinary abilities had been documented across more than 16,000 readings spanning 4 decades, with an accuracy rate that confounded skeptics and believers alike. Born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1877, Cayce discovered his psychic gifts after a childhood illness left him temporarily mute, only to recover with an inexplicable ability to diagnose medical conditions while in a self-induced trance state. By the time he encountered Margaret Whitmore in 1943, he had already established the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, where thousands of people sought answers to life's most profound mysteries. What distinguished Cayce from other psychics of his era wasn't just his diagnostic accuracy, but his ability to access what he described as the Hall of Records, a dimensional library containing the complete history of every soul's journey throughout time. When he spoke about the afterlife experiences of deceased individuals, he wasn't channeling spirits or receiving messages from beyond. He was reading the actual spiritual records of souls as they progressed through their post-mortem transitions, observing their activities with the clarity of someone watching events unfold in real time. The session with Margaret Whitmore revealed that her husband's soul had immediately begun what Cayce termed life review processing upon crossing over. Unlike the instantaneous life review described in near-death experiences, this process unfolds gradually over weeks, allowing the soul to examine not just the events of the recent incarnation, but their deeper spiritual significance and karmic implications. During the first month after death, souls work with what Cayce called guidance counselors, advanced spiritual beings who help newly transitioned souls understand the broader context of their earthly experiences. These guidance counselors aren't angels or religious figures, but souls who have completed their own cycles of earthly incarnations and now serve as mentors for those beginning their afterlife journey. In Margaret's husband's case, Cayce revealed that he was working with a former ship captain who had died in the 1800s, someone who understood the psychological challenges of sudden death in maritime accidents and could provide specialized support during the adjustment process. The most startling aspect of Cayce's revelation was the discovery that deceased souls maintain active concern for their living loved ones, but not in the way most people imagine. Rather than hovering around earthly locations or trying to communicate through traditional means, they engage in what Cayce described as spiritual preparation work, actively participating in the planning and coordination of events that will support their loved ones, spiritual development and healing. Margaret's husband, according to the reading, was collaborating with other souls and spiritual guides to orchestrate a series of seemingly coincidental events that would help his wife discover her own psychic abilities and life purpose. The dreams she had been experiencing weren't random visitations, but carefully planned communications designed to gradually awaken her intuitive gifts and prepare her for a significant spiritual mission that would unfold over the following months. This concept revolutionized understanding of how deceased souls relate to the living world. Rather than being passive observers or occasional visitors, they become active participants in the spiritual development of those they left behind. Cayce explained that souls carry deep love and commitment beyond physical death, but express these feelings through orchestrated opportunities for growth rather than emotional comfort alone. During the second month after death, according to Cayce's documented readings, souls begin what he called dimensional orientation training. This phase involves learning to operate within multiple levels of spiritual reality simultaneously, developing abilities that were impossible while constrained by physical existence. The newly deceased learn to perceive the interconnectedness of all souls throughout time, gaining perspective on how their earthly relationships extended far beyond single lifetimes. Margaret's husband was reportedly learning to access what Cayce termed the, quote, soul group records, discovering the deeper spiritual connections he shared with family members, friends, and even strangers he had encountered during his earthly life. This process revealed that many of his significant relationships had extended across multiple incarnations, with each lifetime providing opportunities to balance karmic debts and develop spiritual qualities together. The training also involved developing communication abilities that transcended physical limitations. Rather than trying to manipulate physical objects or speak through mediums, souls learn to influence circumstances and inspire insights that serve their loved ones' highest good. Margaret's husband was mastering techniques for sending guidance through dreams, synchronicities, and intuitive impressions that would appear naturally rather than dramatically. One of the most profound aspects of this dimensional training involved what Cayce called parallel life observation. Newly deceased souls discover that consciousness exists simultaneously across multiple dimensions, and they begin observing alternate versions of their earthly life that unfolded according to different choices and circumstances. This experience provides deep understanding of how free will operates within spiritual law, and how every decision creates ripple effects across dimensions of reality that most living people never perceive. Margaret's husband was reportedly observing parallel versions of his life where he had survived the naval accident, exploring how those alternate realities would have affected not only his own spiritual development, but the growth opportunities available to Margaret and their children. This observation wasn't meant to create regret or confusion, but to provide complete understanding of how his death served the highest spiritual good for everyone involved, even when the preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Reasons weren't apparent from earthly perspective. The third month after death marked the beginning of what Cayce described as service assignment preparation. Having completed their life review and dimensional orientation, souls begin preparing for their next phase of spiritual work, which might involve reincarnation planning, becoming guidance counselors for other souls, or engaging in cosmic service projects that support the spiritual evolution of entire planetary systems. For Margaret's husband, this phase involved training to become what Cayce called a transition specialist, a soul who helps other people navigate the death process with greater understanding and less fear. His own experience of sudden death in a maritime accident had provided him with unique qualifications for helping others who faced similar circumstances, and he was learning advanced techniques for providing comfort and guidance to souls during their crossing over process. This service orientation represented a fundamental truth about afterlife existence that Cayce emphasized repeatedly across thousands of readings. Death doesn't represent retirement from spiritual work, but graduation to more advanced levels of service and responsibility. Souls who have completed earthly incarnations don't spend eternity in passive bliss, but engage in increasingly sophisticated spiritual projects that serve the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. The preparation for service assignments also involved what Cayce termed karmic resolution completion. During this phase, souls finalize the spiritual lessons from their recent earthly experience and balance any remaining karmic debts through direct spiritual work rather than future incarnations. Margaret's husband was reportedly completing karmic balances related to leadership responsibilities during his naval service, working directly with souls of sailors who had served under his command to ensure their spiritual development remained on track. This karmic completion work represented one of the most significant opportunities available during the first 3 months after death. While living souls must work through karma gradually across potentially multiple lifetimes, deceased souls can resolve karmic imbalances quickly through concentrated spiritual effort. This accelerated resolution explains why some people report profound healing and closure experiences with deceased loved ones long after the formal grieving process has ended. The most extraordinary revelation from Margaret's session involved Cayce's description of how deceased souls prepare for future interactions with their living loved ones across time. Rather than being limited to the immediate aftermath of death, souls use their 3-month orientation period to plan meaningful connections that might unfold years or even decades later, when their loved ones are ready for deeper spiritual understanding. Margaret's husband was reportedly coordinating his future reincarnation to occur during his children's middle age, ensuring that he would return as someone who could provide spiritual support during their most challenging life transitions. This planning involved collaboration with advanced spiritual beings who oversee reincarnation cycles, ensuring that soul group members have opportunities to support each other's development across multiple lifetimes. The implications of these revelations extended far beyond personal comfort for grieving individuals. Cayce's readings suggested that understanding the genuine activities of deceased souls could transform how living people approach death, grief, and spiritual development. Rather than fearing death as an end or hoping for reunion in some distant heaven, people could recognize death as a graduation to more advanced spiritual work that maintains deep connection with loved ones through service rather than sentiment. Margaret's experience following her session with Cayce demonstrated the practical applications of this understanding. Instead of remaining trapped in grief, she began actively participating in what she recognized as her husband's ongoing spiritual work. She developed her intuitive abilities, eventually becoming a respected spiritual counselor who helped other widows navigate their grief process with greater spiritual perspective. The dreams that had initially brought her to Cayce's attention evolved into clear guidance communications that helped her make decisions, serving not only her own spiritual development, but the growth of her children and community members who sought her counsel. She understood that her husband's death had initiated a collaborative spiritual partnership that was more meaningful and purposeful than their earthly marriage had been. This transformation illustrated one of Cayce's most significant teachings about death and afterlife. The deceased don't leave their loved ones behind, but instead become more available for spiritual collaboration than they were during physical life. The limitations and distractions of earthly existence often prevent souls from expressing their deepest spiritual connections, but death removes these barriers and allows pure spiritual love to manifest through orchestrated opportunities for growth and service. The documented case of Margaret Whitmore represented just one example among thousands of similar revelations that emerged from Cayce's readings about afterlife experiences. Each case revealed consistent patterns about the 3-month transition period, confirming that consciousness continues with purpose and direction rather than dissolving into formless existence or remaining trapped in earthly attachments. Across different individuals and circumstances, Cayce's readings described the same general progression: life review and guidance counselor assignment during the first month, dimensional orientation and parallel life observation during the second month, and service assignment preparation during the third month. However, each soul's specific experiences within this framework reflected their unique spiritual development, earthly relationships, and karmic requirements. Some souls required extended periods in what Cayce called healing dimensions, if their death involved significant trauma, or if they had developed strong material attachments that required gradual release. Others moved quickly through the standard 3-month progression if they had achieved spiritual understanding during earthly life that prepared them for afterlife transitions. The consistency of these patterns across thousands of readings provided compelling evidence for the accuracy of Cayce's information. Unlike religious teachings about afterlife that remained vague or contradictory, his documented sessions provided detailed, verifiable descriptions that helped living people understand exactly what their deceased loved ones were experiencing and how they could support that process through their own spiritual development. One of the most profound aspects of Cayce's afterlife revelations involved the discovery that deceased souls continue learning and evolving during their transition period. Rather than achieving instant enlightenment upon death, they engage in intensive spiritual education that builds upon their earthly experiences while transcending the limitations that physical existence had imposed on their consciousness. Margaret's husband, for example, was learning advanced healing techniques that he would later use in his service assignments, but these lessons built upon medical knowledge he had acquired during his naval career. His earthly experience provided the foundation for spiritual abilities that would have been impossible to develop without that practical background. This continuity between earthly learning and afterlife development suggested that physical incarnations serve as spiritual boot camps that prepare souls for more advanced work in non-physical dimensions. Every skill developed, every relationship formed, and every challenge overcome during earthly life becomes a resource for spiritual service that extends across multiple dimensions and time periods. The educational aspect of the 3-month transition period also involved what Cayce described as cosmic perspective integration. Newly deceased souls gradually expand their awareness to encompass the spiritual evolution of their entire soul group, their planet, and eventually their solar system and beyond. This expansion occurs gradually to prevent consciousness shock that could result from suddenly perceiving unlimited reality after being confined to individual personality awareness. Margaret's husband was reportedly progressing through successive levels of cosmic awareness, first understanding his role in his immediate family's spiritual development, then his connection to his community's evolution, then his planet's ascension process, and eventually his participation in galactic spiritual projects that involved multiple star systems. Each level of awareness brought greater understanding of how individual experiences serve universal spiritual purposes. This cosmic perspective integration explained why deceased souls often seem to possess wisdom and knowledge that far exceeds what they demonstrated during earthly life. Death removes the veils that limit consciousness during physical incarnation, allowing souls to access their complete spiritual heritage and understand their eternal nature rather than identifying with temporary personality characteristics. The final aspect of the 3-month transition period that Cayce emphasized involved preparation for what he called dimensional choice points. After completing their orientation and service training, souls must decide how they will continue their spiritual evolution, with options including immediate reincarnation, extended afterlife service, or advancement to higher spiritual dimensions that transcend the earth-based reincarnation cycle entirely. Margaret's husband was approaching this choice point during the later part of his 3rd month, weighing his options based on his spiritual development level, his commitments to loved ones still in physical incarnation, and his personal preferences for continued growth. Unlike earthly decisions that often must be made with limited information, these dimensional choices are made with complete understanding of all consequences and unlimited time for consideration. Some souls choose immediate reincarnation if they feel prepared for advanced earthly spiritual work, or if they have specific service commitments that require physical embodiment. Others choose extended afterlife service if they can contribute more effectively to spiritual evolution from non-physical dimensions. Still others choose advancement to higher spiritual dimensions if they have completed their connections to earth-based existence and are ready for cosmic service that transcends planetary boundaries. The choice point represents genuine free will operating within spiritual law, allowing souls to participate consciously in designing their continued evolution rather than being assigned to predetermined paths. However, the choices are always made in collaboration with spiritual guides and soul group members to ensure that individual decisions serve the highest good for all involved. Margaret's understanding of this choice point process helped her release attachment to her husband's return through reincarnation. Recognizing that his spiritual advancement might require service assignments that would delay his physical return for many years or even lifetimes. This understanding transformed her grief into pride and support for his spiritual achievements rather than selfish desire for reunion on her terms. The broader implications of Cayce's revelations about the first 3 months after death extend far beyond comfort for the bereaved. These teachings suggest that death represents a promotion to advanced spiritual responsibility rather than escape from existence or punishment for earthly failures. Understanding this truth could transform how living people approach their current incarnations, recognizing their earthly experiences as preparation for eternal spiritual service, rather than temporary adventures with no lasting significance. Furthermore, these revelations indicate that deceased loved ones remain actively involved in the spiritual development of living family members and friends, but through sophisticated guidance and opportunity coordination rather than direct intervention or emotional dependency. This understanding could help bereaved individuals move beyond passive grieving toward active spiritual collaboration with their deceased loved ones. The 3-month transition period also suggests that death timing is carefully coordinated to serve spiritual purposes rather than being random or tragic. Margaret's husband's death, while seeming premature and unnecessary from an earthly perspective, represented precisely timed graduation that allowed him to provide spiritual support that would have been impossible if he had remained in physical form. This perspective doesn't minimize the genuine grief and loss experienced by survivors, but provides a framework for understanding death within the context of eternal spiritual evolution rather than temporary earthly existence. The pain of separation remains real, but can be balanced by recognition that the deceased loved one has advanced to more meaningful spiritual work that benefits everyone involved. Edgar Cayce's documented revelations about the afterlife activities of deceased souls represent some of the most detailed and practical spiritual teachings ever recorded. Unlike abstract religious concepts about heaven and hell, his readings provided specific information about consciousness continuation, spiritual education, service opportunities, and ongoing relationships that transcend physical death. The case of Margaret Whitmore and her husband illustrates how these teachings can transform the experience of death and grief, from devastating loss to recognition of spiritual advancement and continued collaboration. Her subsequent development as a spiritual counselor demonstrated the practical applications of understanding death as transition rather than termination. The consistency of afterlife information across thousands of Cayce's readings provides compelling evidence for consciousness, survival, and continued evolution beyond physical existence. The detailed descriptions of spiritual activities, educational processes, and service assignments create a comprehensive map of post-mortem experience that helps living people understand their eternal nature and prepare consciously for their own eventual transitions. Most significantly, these revelations suggest that the relationships formed during earthly life continue to evolve and deepen through spiritual collaboration that transcends the limitations of physical existence. Death separates personalities temporarily, but strengthens soul connections permanently by removing barriers that prevent complete spiritual intimacy. Understanding what deceased loved ones actually do during their first 3 months after death provides living people with practical guidance for supporting that process through their own spiritual development, maintaining connection through service rather than sentiment, and preparing consciously for their own spiritual advancement when their earthly assignments are completed. The deceased don't leave their loved ones behind, but graduate to more advanced levels of spiritual service that benefit everyone involved. Recognizing this truth transforms death from enemy to teacher, from ending to beginning, and from separation to deeper spiritual union that extends throughout eternity and serves the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.